Hannah Murray on TRE in the afternoon.
Good afternoon. Joining us on the line now is Peter Stanfield, whose latest book, The Yardbirds, is about the trailblazers in the rapid development of pop music in Britain between 1963 and 68. With members including Eric Clapton, Jeff Beck and Jimmy Page, they helped to set the basic template of what has been known ever since as rock music and gave rise to one of the most commercially successful bands of all time, Led Zeppelin. Welcome to the show, Peter.
Hello.
Hi, thanks for joining us. It must have been a fun for you, kind of going back over the archives and listening to the music and things, putting this book together.
It was indeed weeks and weeks spent in the British Library going through every British music paper, teenage magazine and whatever else I could find that had mention of the Yardbirds in it.
Yeah, brilliant. So just tell us about their beginnings. How did they meet? How did the group form?
Well, they're all from the west of London, on the suburbs of London, Kingston area, and which was an incredible breeding ground for British rhythm and blues. So, Ill Pie Island was where, and the Crawdaddy Club in Twickenham was where they got their kind of start around Richmond. So they followed the Rolling Stones, and they were the band that took over the Rolling Stones residency at the Crawdaddy, and then they were kind of really set to be to follow the Stones into the charts. So that was their beginning, in the west of London.
Yeah. So were they all friends then?
Yeah, they went to, various of them went to art school. Keith Relf, the singer, went to art school with, met Eric Clapton there, who was doing stained glass design, if you can believe that. And Chris Dredger, the rhythm guitarist, was also there.
Okay.
And others went to school together. They all came from a very small area of London. And later on, guitarist Jimmy Page and Jeff Beck were also from that location.
Yeah. And did they all, did they all have dreams of stardom? I mean, did they all have a clear vision of what they wanted to achieve?
I don't think at the beginning. I think they were kind of classic beatnik bohemians. That rhythm and blues was a way of kind of breaking away from their kind of white suburban blandness, if you like. It was a more exciting world to enter into than a workaday job as a clerk or a panel beater in a factory or something.
Yeah. And where did the name Yardbirds come from?
Well, that's from Keith Relf, who picked it up, I think, from Charlie Parker, the jazz musician. His nickname was Bird, but it's also it's just slang for the guys that just kind of hang around in prison squares and things. So for Keith Relf and for the rest of the band, it was that it carried heavy connotations of American lower class, non-class.
So after this gig that they took over from the Rolling Stones, where did that kind of get them or take them? What happened after that?
Yeah, so what's really interesting, one of the things I try and trace in the book is that the move from the suburbs, rhythm and blues as a suburban music, taken up by really, really young guys. And then that moved towards the centre of London and Soho in the Marquee Club. So you've gone from the Richmond Athletic Club and Ill Pie Island and the pubs where the trad jazz bands used to play to right at the centre, at the very heart of things in London. And the Marquee Club would be was the prime place to play. So that was their real launch pad into more of a kind of, so that they would then move from London to a more of a national profile.
Yeah. And who were they kind of competing with at the time? Who did they see as some of their biggest rivals?
Well, there was kind of a wider kind of competition started around 1964 between Merseybeat, following in the footsteps of the Beatles, and then the kind of more London-centric rhythm and blues. But the Rolling Stones and the Beatles are obviously far out ahead of everybody else. But their most immediate competitors would be people like Long John Baldry, the Pretty Things, Van Morrison's, them. The Animals, of course, from Newcastle came down, and they were in hot competition with them. And a little bit later, the big competition came from the Who. The two bands really sparred with each other early 1965.
Yeah. And, you know, a lot of music connoisseurs and certainly people who grew up in the 60s and had the pleasure of listening to and enjoying the music, you know, a lot of people say that they don't make music like they used to. You know, the 60s and all the groups that you mentioned are really kind of seen as being up there with the greatest, and no one's ever been like them since. Do you think there's an argument for that?
Yeah, I do, in the sense that there were no rules, and they whatever rules there were, they were making up as they went along, and so left them as a kind of legacy for bands that would follow in the 70s and well into the 80s. So there was a sense that, you know, everything was up for grabs, and that you could make something quite unique out of it all. End of the 70s, really, people are beginning to ask, you know, is there anything new to be done with bass guitar, lead guitar, drums, and vocals? So, I really do think that argument does hold water.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. And so much of the music feels timeless, doesn't it? When you listen to it now, great songs, great melodies, great guitar and drums. As you say, you don't think, oh, that sounds so old and dated. They're just great songs. That really is the incredible thing that they, you know, if you only had to go back 30 years from prior to the Yardbirds, and the recordings from that sound absolutely archaic, prehistoric. But you go 30 years back from today, the Yardbirds still sound, 60 years now, the Yardbirds still sound modern, I think. Still sound like the sound of tomorrow. Yeah.
And I'm holding on there.
And I'm a bit of a quiz geek and like facts and things like that. And one of my favourite kind of quiz questions to pull out every so often is, who is the only artist to have been in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame 3 times, once as a solo artist and twice in 2 different groups? And I'm sure you know the answer.
Must be Eric Clapton then, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, which is seriously impressive, because most people would think that it might be Paul McCartney, with Wings and the Beatles and as a solo artist, but no, it's Eric Clapton. Yeah. I'm surprised. And Jimmy Page must be in there twice then. Yeah, probably. Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, do you have favourites when you think of the Yardbirds and listen to their music? Have you got favourite songs?
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously, Eric Clapton's blues playing is stellar, but I think the band really come into their own, really can make a claim for themselves as one of the great bands of the 1960s when Jeff Beck takes over. And what he does on the guitar is unlike anybody else. He's not playing the blues, a suburban white boy's version of the blues. He's making the electric guitar into the sound of today, of right now. It may be put onto the kind of the body of rhythm and blues, but the way that he uses amplification, noise, feedback, led the way for Pete Townsend and the Who then to follow in their steps and to in some ways overtake them. But with Jeff Beck, I think the Yardbirds become something really very, very special indeed. And then that's kind of amplified to the point of getting really loud when Jimmy Page joins. And for a very short time, you had Jeff Beck and Jimmy Page playing together, and that must have been quite something to see or to hear.
Yeah. And quite noisy.
very, very noisy, yeah. When they did a tour late on in the day as a 5-piece with those 2 guitarists, they were supporting the Rolling Stones. They played at the Albert Hall. The Yardbirds were 3rd on the bill. The middle group was Ike and Tina Turner. And I think that they didn't get brilliant reviews for the tour, but part of the problem was that the two guitarists was just so loud. There wasn't the vocal PA systems to compete with the sound of their back line. They I think the alcohol must still be reverberating today from those two.
Oh, brilliant. And how long were they together then? Why did they split up?
It's 5 years. Well, one of the interesting, they just wore themselves out. They toured non-stop. They were one of the least recorded bands of the big groups in the 60s. They hardly seem to have gone into the recording studio at all, except for to do one studio album and just kind of clutch a single, 5 or 6 great singles. And so, to earn money, they just constantly toured. In the first instance, obviously, it was all around Britain and then Europe, and then later it was 5 tours of the United States, and that kind of crisscrossing America, often as part of a package tour with a Dick Clark Caravan of Stars, playing with Sam the Sham and the Pharaohs and other lesser artists, just completely, I think, just 23, 24, they were just burnt out.
So there were no... sorry, go on.
Yeah, sorry. No, but by 68, when the band had decided to fall apart, Jimmy Page, who'd had done a couple of tours in the States with them, saw where the future lied, which was that everything was changing. FM radio was coming on. The album was becoming more important than the single. There was a vast audience of young people in their early late teens, those going to university, and a whole new kind of concert a circuit set up by people in ballrooms and university campuses. So they would know, bands coming from England would no longer need to go on to these kind of Dick Clark Caravan of Stars things. When the Who first toured America, they were in support of Herman's Hermits, if you can believe that. So Jimmy Page, he could see what the future was, and it was ready to be exploited. So I think, although the Yardbirds burnt out, they set the template really for what would follow for bands like Led Zeppelin.
So there were no kind of major fallouts or anything. They all stayed friends, did they?
Friends, I'm not sure. Well, I don't think they stayed friends particularly with Eric Clapton. Jeff Beck did, but the others had enough of him very early on. Apparently, he was not a great companion in the back of a transit van or a dormer van. It would have been a moody guy, to say the least. Apparently, it wasn't so much that they kind of fell out with one another. Keith Ralph and the drummer Jim McCarty wanted to follow a more kind of folky line, wanted to get away from the Rama-Lama rock and roll side of things, where Jimmy Page wanted to continue to explore that side of things. He felt that the adventure that he'd started on with the Yardbirds wasn't complete, and then he moved in that direction. Nearly all of them, one way or another, would stay in the kind of music industry, whether as photographers or musicians. But there was no grand falling out or terrible backbiting. I think it was literally just exhausted. They were just literally exhausted. They couldn't see where they could go from there.
Yeah. So did Jimmy Page and Eric Clapton both go on to their future projects quite quickly then?
Yeah, I mean, Clapton ends up after leaving the Yardbirds. He works for John Mayall's Blues Breakers, and he has a similar kind of relationship with the Blues Breakers as he did with the other members of the Yardbirds. It wasn't a particularly happy relationship. But then he decides that after slumming around the clubs of Britain with those two bands, it was time for him, like the Yardbirds, to make a bit of money, and so he forms the Cream. The definitive was there at the beginning, and again, I mean, following in the footsteps of the Yardbirds, going to America and working this new circuit of clubs, ballrooms, and university gigs. Extraordinarily successful, really quite extraordinarily successful, very quickly. So he I don't think he rode on the back of the Yardbirds, but the Yardbirds as a band made it possible for him to do what he did with the Cream. Opened up that market, that audience in America for them.
Yeah. And Jimmy Page?
And Jimmy Page, yeah. Well, of course, we got my book coming out just now is really timely because there's this huge. It's always huge with Led Zeppelin, but there's a new documentary, Becoming Led Zeppelin, which opens at IMAX next week and is playing in cinemas around the country. And that film, that documentary should show us that transition from the Yardbirds into Led Zeppelin and what he feels were the kind of key elements that he brought with him to the new band with Robert Plant and so forth.
Great. That'll be interesting to see. In the meantime, listeners can definitely get a copy of your book, The Yardbirds. It's available on our website, tre.radio, and it's by Peter Stanfield, who we've been chatting with today. Peter, thanks so much for joining us.
My pleasure.
Sure. I bring you diamond rings and things right to your door. To fill you with delight, I'll give you diamonds bright. There'll be days that will excite and make you dream of me at night. Give the moon if it were mine to give. I'd give the stars and the sun before I live. To thrill you with delight, I'd give you diamonds bright. There'll be days that will excite, make you dream of me at night.
The Yardbirds and For Your Love.